We are ready to step into chapter 2, looking at verses 1 and 2. When the day of Pentecost finally arrived, they were all together in one place. The Jewish feast was 50 days after Passover, and it celebrated first fruits of the wheat harvest. On the Old Testament day of Pentecost, Israel received the law. And on the New Testament day of Pentecost, the church received the Spirit of grace in its fullness. It was 10 days after the time Jesus ascended into heaven, that's Acts 1:3, and Jesus commanded them to wait for the coming of the Holy Spirit. They were gathered together, they were sharing the same heart, the same love for God, and the same trust in His promise, and they were in the same place. They recognized that they did not have the resources in themselves to do what they could do or should do for God, and they insisted to rely on the work of God, that is, the Holy Spirit. Verse 2, suddenly there came from heaven the sound of like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Association of sound and rushing wind filling a house is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and it's unusual, but it is probably connection with the fact that the Hebrew and Greek languages, the word for spirit, such as the Holy Spirit, is the same word for breath or wind. And the same goes with Latin later on. Here, the sound from heaven was the sound of the Holy Spirit being poured out on the disciples. This sound, it's interesting as you look through the Hebrew scriptures, and this wind was there in Genesis 1 and 2. The ruah, it says it hovered, and the hovering over the face of the deep was like a tornado or hurricane over the face of the deep. So the Holy Spirit is a powerful personality of God. The Holy Spirit is called a breath, blowing new life into created man. Genesis 2, verse 7. In Ezekiel, the Spirit of God, or the wind or breath of God, was moving over the valley of dry bones, bringing them back to life. And notice what the Holy Spirit moves, He comes suddenly. Sometimes God moves suddenly. There's a sound, and it was from heaven. So it wasn't an earthly force. It was a heavenly force, and it was a full force that came in mighty power.